So, by my best prediction, Matt, I think there were 7 people that you did not either piss off or irritate.
I still got 10 minutes.
No, I won't take care of it for you. All right, last of the panel discussions, and I appreciate you guys sticking around. We have a very esteemed panel, and I'm going to kind of like do like the other guys did. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves if you would. Give us all the background that you want, as long as it's not too much. And then give us a little bit about your thoughts of kind of what you heard and what's on your mind, Dr. Odde.
Testing 1, 2. Well, thank you, Darrh. Let me start out with just a bit of my background. So I retired from Kansas State University about a year and a half ago. I spent 29 years in academia and 8 years in industry. And then last April or May, I got a call from Tom Brink, and Tom asked me to participate in something called the Genetic Merit Pricing Task Force, which really has a goal of growing the number of calves and feeder cattle in this country that are marketed with quantitative genetic information. So we've got a lot of kind of efforts that have already happened in various breed associations. But I think if you look at kind of the broad goal here, we're trying to look at increasing that percentage, and we think that has a lot to do with, it should have a lot to do with driving additional value into the industry. Just a little bit of the task force. We have 32 members of the task force. We have 2 animal breeders. So we have Matt Spangler and Barry Keene. And let me assure you that they're driving their thinking into this effort of this task force as well. We have 2 economists. You might be familiar with Darrell Peel of Oklahoma State and John Malifka in Idaho. They both write a lot, and we see a lot of their information. But we also have about 10 cattle feeders in there. I want to mention this because I would say that genetic information is not on a top of mind kind of thing for most of our cattle feeders in this country. And most of them are not, I think they are knowledgeable people, good managers. They're just not very informed in what I would call the value of genetics in our beef cattle populations. And I think just a month ago, we had a meeting in Denver, and of course, we charged Larry and Matt with kind of helping lay the groundwork for with that particular group. But I bring that up because I think it also goes to this issue of garnering data from commercial operations. So, and I would also tell you that Larry and Matt made a good effort to try to explain to our group essentially what you've heard here this morning is the value of garnering data phenotypes from commercial operations. So just a little more on my background. I've spent my career doing a lot of what I call field research. So it's working with a lot of Colorado State, did a lot of work with cow-calf operations. My area is reproduction. I worked for Pfizer for a number of years and did a lot of contract research with large feedlots, with commercial cow-calf operations, with contract research organizations. Went back into academia as an administrator and dealt with a lot of the issues that you deal with trying to do research in commercial kind of settings. And I bring that up because I think it's really important that we remind ourselves that commercial operations are built first and foremost to make money. They're not built first and foremost to collect data for genetic organizations. And if we over-assume the ease of actually getting that done, I think we're making a fairly big mistake. So I really want to kind of make that emphasis here as we think about that. Some of the hurdles that I see is, first of all, it's not necessarily a high priority for these commercial operations to make sure the data gets collected the way we would like to actually get it collected. Number 2, I think this is a growing trend that I think is a big barrier is in my career, especially in academia, I was started in the early 80s, and we really saw data as a public asset, not necessarily a proprietary asset. That's really changed over the last 30, 40 years. It's changed in the private sector and it's changed in the public sector. So now we have lots of organizations who are interested in selling data, but not very many organizations that are interested in sharing data. Okay, so I think that's a big issue here. So we have more proprietary information. A couple of my recommendations as we think about this, I think the strategy for garnering more commercial data, I think looking at vertically coordinated systems that already exist, where you have feedlots, cow-calf operations, processing plants that are really already in some kind of system, are probably the best opportunity for getting some of these kinds of things done. And I'm not necessarily saying that's going to be easy, because the other thing we have to think about is, Matt talked about flexibility, but also standardization of data. And I'm going to tell you, I think this is going to require a substantial amount of funding. I want to go back to Larry Benishek's statement yesterday, who should pay, and I really do think this has the opportunity for significant public funding. And I think that work has to be tied to climate change. So you have to sell this on the viewpoint that enhancing efficiency in an animal industry has a significant opportunity on the climate front, reducing carbon footprint, whether it's methane, but I think that's kind of the angle. And I think we should not forget that our federal government has been putting out a lot of money, probably $3 billion in this that went to NRCS that's being distributed in a variety of different ways. So I encourage you to kind of think about that way. And then the other thing that I also want to mention, I think we tend to forget just how big our industry actually is. But in this year, 2023, my estimate is we'll sell about $80 billion worth of cattle. Okay, so if you think about a couple of million to invest in what I'm suggesting here is an opportunity to really enhance genetic progress. It's a very small percentage of what the size of our industry actually is, and I think it's easy to overlook that. So some other hurdles that I see is keep in mind that about 90% of our calves in this country change ownership around the time of weaning or through a background period. So we don't have a high percentage of our calves that are really tied up in vertically coordinated systems. So I think we need to understand that as well. And I'll stop now and pass it over here to JR.
Thanks, Ken. I'm JR Tait. I've been coming to BIF genetic prediction workshops for quite a while, starting as a graduate student before I understood the group I was joining and things like that. After my PhD, I worked at a university. I've worked for the federal government, and now I've worked for Neogen for about 7 years. I get to work with the R&D team at Neogen, product creation, working with the folks like Justin Koss, who came here to this meeting about our sequencing portfolio, our GGPs, our identity commercial portfolio. But I also am involved with our global business activities and things like that. And so I'll just share a little bit relative to that. I hear and I understand. I grew up on a farm. I'm as cheap as anybody. But I think we do a very poor job of articulating the value that is incurred and improved by this. Our competitive industries, the chickens and the pigs and things like that, they have single entities making the decisions, and they see the value and they can leverage the value of an investment in genotyping for the increased genetic merit on a polygenic breeding objective kind of basis. In the beef industry, as I look at it and I see the customers coming to us, it's about half the value is on managing recessive defects and parentage verification, and probably about half the value on the increased rate of genetic progress that can be accomplished. So I think we need to do a better job of articulating what that value is in that part. And I think Matt Spangler gave some very good ideas around changing the models and things like that. I think maybe one of the things that I thought about during Matt's presentation is maybe the heritability on commercial data is much lower than what it is in the seed stock business as well. And for instance, we work with entities that are self-funding development of internal tools so that they can spend along the orders of $50 to find the 10% of animals that won't be productive and meet a metric at the end of a production system. And so they see that identifying that 10% and not investing in the cost of developing that when it's not going to meet the metric at the end is worth self-development of activities, implementation of the tools, even if they're a little bit weak, and implementing that so that they can see value and more profitability by not investing in cost of production of a product that's not going to meet an end goal and some things like that. So there's just lots of opportunities to continue to work on what is the modeling and what is the way that you bring the information in that drives improved decision-making and such. Yeah.
Well, thanks, JR, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. My name is Kent Anderson. I work in technical services for Zoetis. Most of that's beef genetics, but some of it's dairy as well. And you might ask, well, what is that job exactly? And JR, I think it's similar to yours in that on one end of the spectrum, we work with our R&D colleagues to develop and refine existing products as well as evaluate the efficacy of predictions. And then we work in various other capacities, be it with strategic customers to help them get the most out of their investment in the technology. In addition to the breed association work that we do, and I assume this is the reason I'm up here, I'm not real sure, we do several custom and I would say private genetic evaluations. And sometimes the role I play in that is to help to acquire data resources to fuel those endeavors. And I think, Matt, the last slide that you put up where you said that, I think you said that genomics is the tool that allows us to, I'm going to add a word, exploit phenotypes is maybe applicable to often what I do. Just phenotypes without a pedigree or without genomics are not very useful. And so even without a pedigree, if we do have genomic information, we can link that back into the evaluation and use it. So that's where I kind of get involved, and we can talk in more detail about that if so desired.
All right. So any questions to start us off for these gentlemen?
Don't remember.
Mine is going to be, all right, and so this is getting to a little bit of, we're talking about trying to access records on commercial operations. And I know it's different in different part of the country. My part of the country, Southeast, there's not a whole lot of records being taken, period. So if you guys can find some way to incentivize our guys to keep records, period, we're going to move this needle a whole lot. Do you see what, and Matt talked about it a little bit, but what is the incentivization? We have the subsidies that Donna talked about. What can we do?
Well, I would say, first of all, if you guys decide to pay me $20,000 per cow, I can do a lot. Or maybe it was 20, it's only $1,000. It's just $1,000 a cow. Well, we'll take that too.
Okay.
So, what I would say is, my home is in South Dakota. I retired from Kansas State and we moved back to our ranch in north central South Dakota. And just kind of give a flavor of what I consider the Northern Plains cow-calf industry. And it has changed, but it's changed in this way. And my county in South Dakota probably has, I'm going to say roughly, 20,000 cows. 10 years ago, those were held in maybe 100 different operations. Today, those are held in about 20 different operations. So what we've had is a lot of growth in herd size, and most of that is not through acquisition of more land, but it's through land leases. So we have a lot more land leases. And what that actually means is herds now are much more spread out. We lease pastures that are up to 70 miles away. And what happens is in those kind of settings where you're really trying to put cattle, you're really in search of lowest cost nutrition. That's what you spend a lot of your time actually doing. It actually doesn't make for easy data collection. Okay? And so in essence, what I would say in an operation like ours, you have a few times a year that you have opportunities for data collection. One is we preg test all our calves. So that one time per year is we can actually collect that data. We have calving dates on everything in our herd. We calve them in a place where we can collect that kind of data. But and then on selected populations like our replacement heifers, we can do a lot more there. So I think that is all possible. But I'm also going to tell you that there's a lot of variability with weather and weather conditions, and labor is a real challenge. So getting things done when we would like to get them done with labor, this is significant. Part of the reason I mention this is I really think to really make this happen, it will take a significant subsidy to cow-calf operations, whether it's feedlots, whether whoever is involved in the entire system. I think it's not as simple to me as just trying to sell the value. I think it's going to take a significant investment. And then other parts of the country, Darrh, you might be able to speak better to that, but that's how I would paint the picture for kind of the Northern Plains cow-calf industry. And let me also tell you that almost all these calves are going through livestock auction markets. So there's a place there. It's really important because it's a place where value is actually defined. That's where we determine what value actually is when those calves actually go through an auction market. It's also important because they're changing ownership. And that next owner then rarely has the full information on history on those calves. And I don't actually see that changing. You know, I can remember, I'm old enough to be around here. Some of you might remember in 1993, we had something NCBA fostered called the Strategic Alliances Field Trial. And they really put together a bunch of feed yards, a whole bunch of cow-calf operations, and the whole thing was to streamline production such that, and Gary Smith used to say that we can actually enhance our revenue like $242. Well, it missed the piece, which is, first of all, it really made the auction markets mad. Okay, so they saw us being bypassed, but it also kind of overstated. It's a pretty decent efficiency in our industry. I argue that cattle are always chasing cheaper feed. That's really what they're trying to do, is they're chasing cheaper feed. And I think that's probably true almost all over. So I gave you a little picture on what I see in the Northern Plains and what these guys have.
I guess I think of it, I think Dr. Odde makes a very good point about capturing the information at times when producers are going to engage and interact with their animals and making it as a part of a routine engagement rather than an extra added activity that requires engagement there. Even to the point of, if you think about the commercial industry, this will be blasphemy to say this in front of a BIF group, but 205-day adjusted weaning weight is not the economically relevant trait. It's actually in the commercial herds, they take all of the animals to market on one day. So those animals that were born earlier in the calving season actually probably grew 2.5 pounds a day more. So when you adjust to 205, you're not actually representing what the economically relevant trait is, but there's a bit of fertility embedded in that advantage that those earlier born animals have. So that could create some challenges in the heritability, the modeling, all of those kinds of things. But I think when it comes down to getting people to collect the information, what are the downstream analytics and information about a business decision that they're going to make and create as part of that is really what's going to drive that. And there's going to be a significant part of the industry that it is a side project, it's a hobby, it's whatever, and you're probably never going to get engagement on those parts. But the people where this is their livelihood and they have to be economically relevant and efficient in doing that, if you collect the information in a way that helps them make business decisions, then the information that drives in analytics becomes a byproduct of what they're doing to manage the business. And I think that's part of that opportunity in my mind.
Yeah, well said. I would offer, at the different segments, I think there's a difference in the opportunity to collect and exploit commercial information. Probably the cow-calf segment being the most challenging, just because the traditional paradigm is that they don't like to measure and collect things and report information. If they like that, they would be a seed stock producer. So that's why they don't like doing it. Or they'd be milking cows, and that is the ideal segue, whereby, one of the things that my dairy colleagues do that is kind of interesting is the Council on Dairy Cattle Evaluation, the CDCD, they do the evaluation for many, many traits. But in one of our products, we add both genetic predictions for cow wellness and calf wellness, and then we roll those up into a dairy wellness profit dollars. And it helps differentiate the product, but behind the scenes, what enables that to happen is at the dairy level, they do a good job of recording things, especially health events. And so internally, we have a dairy data hub that basically functions to assimilate data from the different on-farm management programs into one place, so then it can go through the proper screening to know whether or not it qualifies to contribute to the genetic evaluation. And it does strike me that even though cow-calf producers are pretty sorry at collecting records, there are a lot of record-keeping systems out there, and I don't know if Dr. Benishek's here still, but he would have probably one of the most powerful that's both seed stock and commercial, with a lot of phenotypes, but there's many others, I won't name them. I don't know that anybody's tried to pull from those and get information assembled or not, and it'd be a big challenge. But in dairy, when you got a population of producers that are measuring all those things and genotyping to connect it together, you can do good things.
Yeah, I think the genotype code once again, just parentage alone. Any other questions? Yes.
So I'll sort of put a question back to Matt and others. At the university, Cam JR, the panel really has highlighted the difficulty and the challenges that commercial producers see watching the data, especially with challenges with labor and finding ways to match their labor resources with data collection. So I'm wondering, is there an opportunity to leverage expertise at the university, investments at the university in precision agriculture to engage faculty in information technology, engineering, who are maybe working in precision management or maybe aren't yet, to have conversations with producers and the scenarios for data collection and data sharing that would have to be achieved so that we can find collaborations outside of our disciplines to find practical solutions for data collection and data sharing.
So I think that there is, all the widgets, right, for precision management, sensing, all those kinds of things. If that can be used to not only help make a decision, but actually collect data at scale, right? So then that's useful. I'd also say though that we don't have to eat this whole elephant all at once. And so get whatever data is already collected, right? And don't don't ask them to do more right away, or I think this is just done, right, before it ever gets off the ground. I think you gotta take whatever's routinely collected, realize some segments of the industry aren't gonna be as well represented initially. That's not ideal, but that's okay. I mean, if there are things that can make it easier for producers, where there's other value related to management, I think that's great. But I certainly wouldn't require them to do anything they're not already doing. And then the hope is, when there's value returned, there's encouragement to perhaps do more to increase the value. That's fine.
Yeah, and you may already know well what those barriers are. It just seemed like a task force, for example, would give you an opportunity to talk through all that. Really drill down on what those real barriers are, and then maybe bring some other sets of eyes and expertise with those.
One, did you get some?
I was, for either the Neogen or Zoetis products, or for the feeder calf products, if Ken's calves went to the sale barn with those profiles, would that affect the price that they received at the sale barn?
So from my understanding, visiting with our sales teams and things like that, when producers are going through and characterizing with our commercial products, they are seeing advantages in the price that the cattle are bringing, and the feeders are paying more for those animals. There are different tiers in how we align with the marketing and things like that. So sometimes it's really elite genetic potential, and it is kind of group-based awareness. So we've even made it so that genotyping heifer mates for selection purposes gives a representation of what the steer mates would be, and they can be marketed with that level of awareness of what that producer's genetic potential of their herd looks like and things like that. So there has been evidence of that. It's just a beginning awareness, though, as I understand it.
Yeah, I would say generally, and Troy Marshall's here, and I would argue that programs like Angus Link, even be it predicted performance in the feedlot and carcass rolled up into indexes that attaches to the animals to help inform price discovery, I think are being increasingly recognized, and that's really some of the things that you're working on, Dr. Odde, and that can be used to help, drive value, help be more of a price maker rather than a price taker. There are always some producers who test, and you realize they're not so bueno at feed conversion, cost of gain, and grade and carcass weight. So it's a double-edged type thing. I would offer that end is maybe one of the easier places to get commercial data. So if you have genotypes available for animals that are harvested, and you can get the carcass data back, and you can inform sire identity or not, that can help then inform the evaluation. Just as a word of caution though, I think most of the time EIDs and alerting the plant ahead of time results in decent carcass data the majority of the time. But if you're doing a lot of it, the more oversight you can have, particularly at time of identification transfer, the better. Because if you do it very long, you're going to run into some groups of animals whereby somewhere along the line, the IDs got mixed up and they will not match the identity of the animal. So I think that's an industry challenge. And as we sell on grids and formulas, I sure wish there was a way to hold ourselves to a higher level of integrity in the carcass data that we get back, so we don't have to do that level of oversight.
Comment I'd like to share with you. So in 1995, actually 1994, I went to work for SmithKline Beach and Animal Health, and shortly thereafter we were acquired by Pfizer. But at that time, I put together a program that we call the Superior Livestock Database. So we actually went to Superior, we put a contract in place with Colorado State at the time, but we started collecting the sale data from Superior Livestock. And our strategy, I was working for an animal health company, so it was mostly built around animal health. But at that time, there was very little information in a sale catalog on commercial feeder cattle about anything. Probably not much, even on calf health. Superior created their calf health program with back 24, back 34, back 45, and back pre-con. So we built a system to evaluate the impact of that on calf sale price. We actually did that for 25 years. In fact, we just discontinued that about 4 years ago. But the point that I want to make is over that period of time, the industry has changed on calf health. And we now have an industry where it is routine in livestock auction markets to report whatever calf health information we actually have, whether they're in a VAC program. In our part of the country, it'd be rare to see a set of calves come through without having that information. So I think we are in the genetic realm. I think we're at the beginning of what I would begin to see as kind of this next step. So, we can look at the heritability of important traits, and it's really important that we communicate this to cattle feeders because they don't necessarily, if they have a set of calves that doesn't do well, they're real quick to blame kind of the genetics of those calves. And so this whole education piece in our cattle feeding industry, I think, is a really, really important piece. But I think we're very early in this. I'll call it the genetic component of feeder cattle marketing. And I think we've got a long ways to go. I would challenge my colleagues to the right here, rather than telling us that these calves are bringing more, how about measuring it and evaluating it, and let's see if they actually do, because that's ultimately, I think, should be the scientific test. We actually see those value differences. So anyway, I just figured it would be a good time for you guys to spend a little money. So thank you.
Any other questions for the panel? Yep, Bob.
So, JR, your comment about the appropriate economically relevant traits, you got been thinking a little bit. What you mentioned, age of weaning, and our colleagues here, Lawrence Snow, one of them amongst the market team, published a paper a couple of years ago that was the maternal trait of cumulative days of age for the weaned calves from the cow, harvested out of our existing database. Cumulative weaning weight, so unadjusted but affected by age as a trait to reflect that maternal component of fertility, calving early, calving season, so forth. What other ones should we go after as you think about the commercial sector, either cow-calf level? And I'm trying to think of all the passive things we can gather information from, either from the nucleus and seed stock sector or from commercial cow-calf that informs those kinds of decisions. So I like Archie's comment about precision ag, what kind of passive data collection might we do digitally to support that?
I guess
Brainstorm that for me for a minute.
from my standpoint, or what I'm thinking about, I think Kent highlighted, the dairies, they have their management systems that capture treatments and things like that. If we think about the seed stock mantra of you have to have the weaning weight, you have to know the pre-weaning contemporary groups and things like that, you start to avoid use of feedlot regimens and things like that. But it's quite possible that under the right scenarios and things like that, treatment records from feedlots that are production oriented and, a diagnosis. We've been down that path. We still don't have any really robust tools available for selection in there. So that's maybe one spot, but that's a noticeable investment and continued work. I know we've had conversations to a large degree. What is the exposure? What's the attribute that is causing the infection in the animals and things like that? Also, the commercial space, it may be quite possible that female longevity and fertility of heifers and things like that may be quite different in the commercial space where they're on a low cost of production, low investment in development programs in order to keep those animals maybe a little bit challenged, but also they have an alternate marketing path to send unbred females into the feedlot and still garner value there. That may be different than highly developed seed stock purebred heifer pregnancy in the breeding evaluations and things like that. Those are a couple of ideas that are possibilities, but it takes a lot of coordination and a lot of work to update the programs, update the mantra of what the model needs to be, and characterize and populate it. This is the way you capture the information, and you tie it to that source of information so you can make improved selection decisions. Maybe you want to.
Yeah, great point. That's a neat trait, that accumulative production. Maybe a side note to think about a little bit, and since I worked almost 20 years at a breed association, I'll take a little license with this. I don't mean anybody to be offended, but to the credit of seed stock producers, most are really good managers, nutritionally and otherwise, and they also do a good job of reproductive management because AI sired calves from superior bulls are usually worth a lot more. So I've always wondered if those are necessarily the same traits. So imagine the number and the timeliness of when they're born and the lifetime weight of calves weaned in a commercial herd that's really well managed versus a lot of the commercial herds, my own of which I observe, not so well managed. You just look at the difference in preg rates. I think they're noticeable. And so in the seed stock where we develop the predictions, a lot of times those pampered cattle really don't express being open or late bred to the same magnitude that they would in a commercial setting where they're managed more extensively and marginally since they're chasing feed. And if we could figure out a way to harness that and get that sort of information in with the caveat that there's all sorts of other things to account for, I think there could be interesting opportunities there.
Yeah.
I'll respond to that just a bit here, but so since I've got more gray hair than you guys have, I'll take the license of in the late 70s and the early 80s when I was really starting my research career, we had two, what I would call really big problems from a reproductive perspective in the beef cattle industry. Number one, we had a lot of calving difficulty. We're coming off of the era where we brought in the continental breeds. We didn't really understand calving ease, birth weights. And so, I can remember many times where we would assist half of the heifers in our herd. That would be very, very common. That's almost totally gone. So in our heifer population, now commercial heifers, Simmental Angus heifers bred to typically calving ease bulls, but we actually worry more about light birth weight calves than we actually worry about heavy birth weight calves. And that's, in fact, we've increased, we try to stay with calving ease, but we've actually increased EPDs that we're using to try to avoid more of these really lightweight calves because we think that's a bit of a problem. The second point that I would make is, early in my career, age of puberty was an area of research investigation that I was actually working on. And at that time, it would be very common for maybe 30–40% of our heifers to not yet be cycling at the start of the breeding season. Today, that percentage of heifers cycling at the start of the breeding season is much closer to 85–90%. And with a synchronization program, MGA prostaglandin, we typically get 95% in heat. And so what I'm going to say is we've actually made a lot of progress on these issues. I really think we actually have. And so what it does is it allows us to devote attention to other issues. I want to talk about the longevity issue because I really think in terms of something that's really economically relevant, is having cows that last is a really, really big deal. So when I was at Colorado State in our IRM project, if we studied the herds in Colorado, we had an annual turnover rate of about 17%. So we would replace about 17% of the cows on an annual basis. The good cow herds now, the good commercial cow herds are far below them. I think we would be at about 12% in our own cow herd. That's a big deal because the cost of maintaining a mature cow is much lower than the cost of developing a replacement heifer. So these are the kinds of things that are, in my view, are really, really important. And, longevity is always a tough one. We use stability, and I was on, Kelly, on your program the other night on functional longevity. I'm trying to learn what you guys are up to. But my whole point, I just think that's a really, really important trait. And one other point that I want to make is while this genetic merit task force that I'm working on is really focused on terminal traits, I think it's really important that we recognize that terminal traits aren't the end all. We want to remain focused on the terminal traits in our cows and really not let that kind of slip from our consciousness.
Ken, I think you're exactly right on the maternal bit. If you talk about the sustainability space in cow-calf production, the fastest way to change any of those numbers is change replacement rate.
Gentlemen, what we do with time, or time is there, but do we keep going or shut her down?
Another question or two, we got time for that, but
Yep. Anybody else? All right, I'm gonna take the opportunity that I've got the mic. I want to ask you a question. In terms of what we've gone over the past 2 days, I have a question to pose to you guys, just to think about. So what we're talking about with the genomic side of thing and with commercial heifer and everything, or commercial data and everything else, is basically improvement of accuracy. Is that for the most part? I know it's very general. For the most part, that's what we're seeking, right? So it was asked about what is our 10-year plan? What is our 10-year plan with accuracy? If we're talking about yearling bulls today with genomics and what we have, current genomics, and we're getting 0.25, 0.3 accuracy, where do we want to push it to? Is that what we're doing with it? It seems like a huge investment to get this needle pushed a little bit. Am I missing the boat here, or is that what we're talking about?
What's the accuracy of the weaned calf right now?
What's that?
What's the accuracy of a commercial weaned calf right now?
Of a commercial wing calf?
Yes.
Nothing.
So is that for our opportunity?
Well, it may be, and that's, and I agree with you with some of the other, but some of the aspects of it seems like a lot of what we're doing, in particular on the genomic side, much more on that side, is to get a little bit increase. Mark, some of the stuff you were talking about, I think that was very fascinating, and I agree that looking at the biology aspects of it are going to help us get there. My point is where are we trying to get to, or do we have to go? Because we're scientists, so we want to be perfectionists, right? We would love for those yearling bulls to be the one on accuracy. We're not going to get there. Where do we want to get? Just something we can think about.
I think yes, it's about better accuracy, but it's also about describing the complete set of traits in the proper function.
I agree, Ken, because to me, we don't have all the right, we don't. Not everybody's doing mature weight. Donna told you guys, profitability is what's important, so we got to get a grip on this cost thing. We don't have, in my opinion, great reproductive traits for genetic evaluations. I agree. Yeah, Mark, you need the mic.
Okay, so you asked an interesting question about chasing a small increase in accuracy. Maybe what we should be thinking about, though, is what's the opportunity for a big increase in accuracy where accuracy currently is extremely low, or not, or zero, as Warren said, because it's for an important trait, maybe an input trait that we're just not measuring at all. And, some of the opportunities like imputing gene expression, for example, could be related to traits that we're never going to be collecting at either the seed stock or commercial level, but where we may be able to collect them at a research level and impute them through to the genetic evaluation. And so any accuracy for some of those traits may be worthwhile.
Absolutely. Anybody else on any? Open mic.
There, I guess, for example, one of the points of having sequencing data is being able to identify regions that we didn't have the opportunity to identify before. So that's, for me, a great opportunity for traits with, for example, lower irritability, that are we identifying all the causal mutations, or at least most of them. So I guess this is a step that will give us the opportunity of doing that and be more precise in the models that we are applying nowadays.
Jordan, I can just holler. I think the thing that we, in Bob's novel yesterday, sort of said this in a sort of way that, like, we're maybe not looking far enough ahead and thinking futuristically enough about what having, low hash sequence imputed data on hundreds of thousands of variables might mean from variant discovery and thinking about gene editing, not just for Mendelian traits, but for multiplexing quantitative traits and doing, molecular breeding, right? This is stuff that sounds futuristic now, but the lines between animal breeding and molecular genetics and gene editing, I think, are going to get blurrier and blurrier. I thought that Mark's presentation yesterday was a really good segue into how biology is going to come into play, and that's going to take more than our current way of doing things. And so whether that results in, a marginal increase in accuracy in the near to immediate term, I think over the next 10 to 20 years, the technologies at our disposal, we can't even really comprehend now. So I think we've got to do work that sets us up to be able to take advantage of those when they become available.